Hello, welcome to the Basketball Addicts podcast. Today we have an interesting one.
I don't think there's 50 guys in the NBA that could be on NBA rosters in the 1980s. I don't think there's more than 50 guys. There's 200 guys here that are pretty bad in the NBA. They could not make a roster.
Whoa.
There's no way. It's like an AAU league. The NBA to me is almost like a glorified AAU league. Kevin Garnett, whenever he said that guys 20 years ago couldn't have played in this league, yeah, he's right. That's when this league started going downhill. From about 98 to about 2005, it was horrible. That era right then when Larry Hughes was in the league, and the league was horrible. Because there were a lot of expansion teams, and it was really diluted. I mean, guys are scoring a lot of points on teams that weren't very good, but somebody's got to score.
So we have to, it's time to autocorrect the old heads. Now, what I mean by that is there's a lot of basketball minds, basketball talking heads, a lot of people that talk about basketball that will glorify the older years, the age before. Whenever they think basketball was great is basically whenever they either fell in love with basketball or was coaching basketball, talking about basketball, when they were playing about basketball. So basically what the comment was is that there could not be 50 players from the modern NBA that would be only 50 players from the modern NBA that could play in the 80s. Which I'm just going to come out and say is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard of in my life. It's time to burst the bubble. First things first, it's hilarious how they'll do the same thing to the people in the 60s. Have you ever heard? How many times I've heard from people that played in the 80s and 90s that talk about, I wish I could have guarded Bob Cousy because he could only dribble with his right hand. I mean, I was watching Kenny the Jet Smith when he was doing one of these TNT things. He said it. He was like, oh man, I wish I could have guarded him. I know he was a great point guard because he was a great point guard in the 60s. But he couldn't translate today's game. Probably wouldn't have been as good in the 80s. Because his skill set was dulled. People have to understand that basketball is like a computer. The high-level guys, more like most guys now, learned from what you did and expanded upon it. That's the natural progression of basketball. So people from the 80s took Bob Cousy and is like, yeah, he's a great passer. We can take that from him, but we're definitely going to improve that ball handling. I mean, geez. Right? I mean, but now people from today's era would look at that and be like, the guys in the 80s can't shoot off the dribble? The guys in the 80s can't create their own shot laterally? The guys in the 80s haven't had the revolution of the crossover and the dribbling ways of Allen Iverson? That's a decade away. You're dribbling, you're the point guard, and your back is to the defender to set up the offense. The greatest point guards, even in the 90s, John Stockton, Gary Payton, did this. I can find 7-year-olds in your local basketball hoop near you that can dribble well without having well enough to not put their back to the person. That's how ridiculous our revolution is on dribbling. Dribbling is something that started with Isaiah Thomas. Isaiah Thomas was ahead of his time in the 80s, right? Tiny Alter Ball was pretty good, but he wasn't really breaking anybody down. It wasn't this amazing, technically sound, super Allen Iverson, Kyrie Irving. Like, we have ridiculous ball handlers everywhere today. College, ridiculous ball handlers. That wasn't around back then. You didn't have people that were so ridiculous, shooting and creating their shot off the dribble, that the whole offense could be ran through the point guard position. Nobody could do that, shooting wise, scoring wise. The only person that achieved something that was like tiny ultra bold. You're telling me 50 players couldn't make it? 50 point guards might be able to make it. This is the greatest point guard era ever. So you don't require your point guards to shoot threes. You just need them to pass, and playing defense is a plus. What? You're telling Mike Conley is, getting like 25 minutes a game right now. He would, be able to do that. Trae Young would destroy the 80s. I mean, even guys like Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder's fast, can set up the offense, make the right pass, shoot a three that would have been above average or average for that era, and defend. He probably would have been a borderline number 10 point guard in the league. And we're like, oh, he's going to come off the bench. Marcus Smart, dear God, he's been like Mr. I'm the greatest bench defender of all time. He would have started in that era. He would have been a better shooter than most of the people that were point guard. A much better defender. I mean, he would have been like Gary Payton's levels defending. He's a good passer. Like, what are you? You guys are crazy. Ridiculous. Everybody talks about the toughness. Have you seen those guys' bodies? They look like high schoolers. Division III college athletes. I've seen I went to the Division III college. There's some D3 college kids that have more muscle than people back then. Why? Because they didn't really work out much. I mean, even Kobe Bryant, during an interview that I was listening to on a podcast, was talking about guys like Mitch Richmond that he could tell that weren't lifting. And he looked at Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, was like, those guys are lifting. It worked for them, so I'm going to add that to my game. Everybody wasn't lifting in the 80s. You guys don't have some power sumo wrestler power forwards and centers. Like Charles Barkley was eating pizzas before games, and you had guys that were doing like heroin and cocaine. It was coming off the heroin cocaine area of the 70s. You guys weren't like, oh, protein powder, we have to be eating really healthy. These guys have grown up with all of the little advancements that you guys did, and the generation after you, and the generation after you, and the generation after you has all been implanted on them since they were like 8. What do you guys, like, have you seen a picture of Bill Laimbeer? I mean, that guy looks like just a normal dad. Like, he has a dad bod. Like, what are we talking about? Have you seen NBA players today? They have like 3% body fat and like all the muscle in the world. There was some rare outstanding characters like Dominique, right, who was just ridiculous. MJ and Scotty put time in the gym. Karl Malone, yeah, they're physical freaks of nature, but your average run-of-the-mill guy was pretty below average. They look like they have never seen a gym of actually lifting. So there's a huge strength and athleticism gap. And then on top of that, they have a huge skill gap. Like, your two guards, like, other than MJ and Clyde, which all they can do is like mid-range and in. MJ's shot developed more in the 90s from the three-point line, but those guys, I mean, we have like ridiculous Bradley Beal would destroy you. Like, I don't know what you guys are losing here. I mean, a great example is Jimmer Fredette. Like, Jimmer Fredette was losing his mind in college. Jimmer Fredette has dropped like 50 points in a game overseas. You're telling me he's not better than Danny Ainge? Danny Ainge is like 6'2", 6'3". All he did was stand in the corner and shoot. That's all he could do. You're telling me Jimmer Fredette's not a better player? I won't believe you. Even Nick Stauskas. You're telling me he couldn't have played in your era? You had a bunch of 6'2", 6'4", 6'3" guards that just shot the ball, that weren't gifted athletically, which is rare to find. Your definition of scoring was like mid-range and a little bit of ISO moves. You're telling me the otherworldly small forwards of today's era couldn't have played in your game? What? Our small forwards of our era have like the very best things of your era put together. Like, they have the shooting of your best two guards, they have the athleticism of your most athletic players, and they have good passing ability. There's point forwards. There's ridiculous. Like, every team has somebody that's really good. I mean, Harrison Barnes would be a top 10 small forward in that era. 50 guys. Like, the only position that's iffy is center, because our current centers don't have as much post skill, and the current center doesn't have as much. Like, the centers of that era were more bulky human beings. A lot of our centers are meant to play small ball, like Onyeka Ngakwu, Willie Cauley-Stein, Norris Lowell, that are naturally like thinner humans, so they can switch. So I'd say like 30% couldn't play in the 80s just because they need size. But, we have guys that could shoot the three. Like, you only had one of those, was like Bill Laimbeer. Like, what you're not understanding is you laughed at Bob Cousy. They're laughing at you because you can't shoot. You can't shot create. I mean, you can shoot it from mid-range, but you can't shoot from three. You can't shoot it from deep range. You can't shoot step backs. You can't shoot concessions threes like that. You can't shot create like that. You guys aren't that amazing out of the pick and roll to make it one of the most dominant things ever. I mean, John Stockton was more in the 90s, but there's a lot of guys that would be more explosive offensively out of the pick and roll than John Stockton. Like, what are you guys? You guys are losing your minds. You guys are crazy. Crazy, all of you. You have this delusional view of basketball, like, if it's not played slow paced, grit and grind, it's not good, right? Like, that's the way you want to see basketball. You want point guards that pass. You don't want to see all that scoring. You want to know why there's more scoring? Because there's more skilled people that can put the ball in the hoop. That's why the numbers are more. 1 through 12, there's more guys that can put the ball in the hoop than in your era. It's not even close. The skilled gap is ginormous. Because what you didn't realize is when you loved your style of basketball, the point guard position was the easiest position to guard. All you have to do is just stand there. You don't have to worry about him beating you off the dribble. And you don't have to worry about him creating his own shot because his role is to create for the team. So what do you have to be worried about? So you have to be worried about 6'7" and 6'8" power forwards and small forwards that would post up. That's all we have to worry about? Have you seen Bernard King? Bernard King's like a 6'5", 6'6". No, he's probably more like 6'7", small forward that posted. I'd like to see him do that today. He'd have no chance. None. You had a bunch of smaller 6'7", 6'8" enforcers at power forward position. And then they went instinct because of Tim Duncan, Dirk, and KG just shot over them. unstoppable formula because you can't guard them. What are you going to do when you can do all the moves you want? You can do all the post moves that we want, but when you're 6'6" and you're shooting over somebody 6'11", your game is worthless. It loses its value. So they made that irrelevant. They made that 80s power forward Charles Barkley type of guy irrelevant. I mean, people will say, oh, there's Zion Williamson in the league right now. Zion Williamson can create off the dribble, run the pick and roll, and finish and make good passes. Like, they're not the same player. He's more of a power point forward. So it's a diluted sense of worth because the skill set is terrible compared to today. And I'm sorry nobody's told you, and I'm sorry that you guys get to live in this cocoon where nobody really challenges you on it because everybody, wants to be respectful to the previous generation because, they did take from you, right? You took from Bob Cousy. You took from Bill Russell. You took from Will Chamberlain. You took from Willis Reed. I mean, yeah, there's an evolution. The 80s is better than the 70s. More positionless players, taller players with passing ability, more understanding of ISO game, pump fakes, all that type of stuff. Great evolution. You guys took what happened before, the evolution on it. There's nobody that likes whatever their decade is that would say the previous decade or 2 decades beforehand was better than them. So that should put things in perspective when you say something ridiculous like those players couldn't play today. The players from today couldn't play then. That's what I meant to say. Like, you guys fooled everybody into thinking you played great defense. Why did you hit people? Why did you play really physical, knock people down, and have this Rough Rider mentality? It's because you couldn't stop anybody. You can't guard them, so you have to hit them. You don't do that when you can stop them. Nobody does that. You fooled everybody into thinking you guys were great defenders. Great team defenses. You tell me Larry Bird could stop anybody? Dear, could I Robert Parrish and Kevin McHale getting switched off on a guard that could create off the dribble? That's barbecue chicken, to quote Shaq. No chance. Zero. Nada. Nothing. It's the way NBA goes. It's a computer. Every decade gets better than the previous. I mean, you're not doing anything with most of the players from today. You're just not. And I know nobody's told you. You know what I mean? Because everybody that's on TV, everybody's in media is older. Of course, no younger person's going to take Skip Bayless's job. You know what I mean? They have an older perspective on basketball. So they all confirm the thoughts that you're having because nobody's really listening to younger people who understand basketball. It's not like I don't have a good background of understanding basketball, who played in what decade, who was the best players, who their strengths and weaknesses. Like, I understand all that stuff, right? I mean, the only thing that maybe you guys did better was more quantity of high-level post scores. Like, that's it. That's one niche in the whole game of basketball. That's it. Nothing else. Zero. That's just the reality. That's the reality that you guys have to accept. You guys are crazy. And somebody needs to tell you it. What you think you understand about basketball hasn't been updated for 40 years. But if somebody would have came out and said, oh, the 60s were the best decade. They had great point guards that would set up the offense. Will Chamberlain, Bill Russell, 8 teams, the league was smaller. All this stuff, right? You'd have been like, no way. We have so much more skilled. You don't have anybody like Magic and Bird. You didn't have anybody that could ISO out like Alex English on the wing and break a defender down. You didn't have as much quantity of 3-point shooters. You didn't have as much quantity as post bigs. Some guys that could space out more the mid range more consistently. You didn't have all those things. And you would tell him he's crazy. And you should. Every decade gets better from the previous. The sad truth, that's true for every decade after you. It's so crazy how people are quick to contradict themselves so much on this one. And yeah, I love this current game of basketball. But 10 years from now, they'll probably be better. There's probably going to be somebody that's going to be greater than LeBron James. That's going to come down the line, be some demigod. And we'll be like, wow, who would have guessed somebody could have all of these traits? It's just the way basketball goes. You guys have to get off of this because it's no longer relevant. The 80s, the 90s, nothing's better than what came after. It's just like a computer. Every decade, the system updates. That's the reality. So yeah, that's a short little YouTube video here. I saw that TikTok video and I was just disturbed. It's just so consistent of old heads to say stuff that just makes no sense. So yeah. Thank you for watching this YouTube video. I am one half of the Basketball Addicts. You guys can find this podcast on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. We're on Spotify, also on Apple Podcasts. So we have a pretty diverse set of places where you guys can enjoy this content. So yeah, please hit the notification bell to get future hot takes on YouTube, segments of our podcast, all those types of things. We're trying to give you guys some really great content. So yeah, I'm Jason Collins, and I am one half of the Basketball Addicts.